All right, good morning. Welcome to Austin, Texas. I know there's probably no way you'd rather start your morning than with a long speech, so here we go. Now, I'll keep it brief and to the point because I think the point of the day is the conversations that we're going to have. But I think Josh gives me a little too much credit for the vision because it's something that he's been driving TPPF towards for many years, and we're thankful for the work because it's really important to what we're doing here in Texas. And I'd also like to jump on with Josh's comments and thank our partners in all this, the Heritage Foundation, our friends in Mexico, Patria Unida, the America First Policy Institute, the Center for Renewing America, and the Center for Free and Secure Society, each of whom has contributed invaluable work and insight to our efforts on this topic. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to our state-based colleagues, many of you who are watching live, but especially our friends from Florida's James Madison Institute who are here in person, who are tackling the challenges of the U.S.-Mexico relationship in their own states. You know, one of the things we emphasize here at TPPF is the reality that every state is a border state, because the crisis of an unsecured border is felt everywhere, not just in Del Rio, Eagle Pass, but it emanates across this whole country. And if you don't believe me, you know, ask some of the mayors of these cities in New York City, Chicago, and elsewhere who are in a panic at experiencing less than 1% of the illegal immigration problem that we are experiencing here in Texas. And this is a national challenge, and in the absence of the federal government that does its job, the states not only must, they have to step up. And we're glad to see good Americans across the country and the other 49 states doing exactly that. And so at this summit, we have an extraordinary gathering of extraordinary people and a full day ahead with great speakers, great conversations, and great ideas. But don't forget that the very best conversations and the very best connections will be the ones that we will make with one another, off stage, and unplanned exchanges that so often lead to great things. When we first discussed this summit, we thought about doing it exclusively virtually. And don't get me wrong, that has its place. In fact, we have a robust live stream series here at TPPF, and we have a live stream later this week. But there is no substitute for fellowship that happens in person and face-to-face. So we're so glad that so many people are coming in to be with us in person. But that's especially true about doing this in person when the issue is as big as the U.S.-Mexico relationship. And make no mistake, it is big in every sense. With the world seemingly on fire, with wars in Europe and in the Middle East and potentially in Asia, and the United States deeply involved in all theaters, it's easy to miss that our greatest challenge is right here in the Western Hemisphere. It's right next door to us here in Texas. That challenge is deeper and more profound than any of the others because it spans every domain: history, trade, economics, culture, migration, crime, military, and beyond. In fact, no other challenge touches every single facet of American life as much as the challenge emanating from Mexico and our border. Of course, the opposite is also true. As our Mexican friends will tell us, no other country is as profoundly important to their own as their northern neighbor, the United States. To paraphrase Porfirio Diaz, the Mexicans are blessed, are cursed, depending on the era and context, by being so far from God and so close to the United States. And here in Texas, we have a special insight and experience with this fraught and enduring relationship between our two nations. We were born in a revolution against a Mexican dictatorship. But it is too often forgotten that our war for independence began as a fight for a specifically Mexican liberty. In fact, the famous Alamo flag is an apt illustration of that truth. The Mexican green, white, and red emblazoned with 1824 upon it. The heroes of the Alamo were Texan and Tejano alike, and the majority understood themselves to be within the American tradition of liberty. In fact, there's a reason that Travis's letter, which is emblazoned on our back wall here, but is an appeal to all Americans in the world. But they went to war to reclaim the freedoms promised under that 1824 Mexican Constitution. Indeed, one of the opening acts of the Texas Revolution was an appeal for aid to other liberty-minded Mexicans in the hopes that the fight for freedom would be truly national. 2 centuries later, here in Texas, we still stand at the crossroads where the ideals of the United States of America and the aspirations of Mexico intersect. That's why it is so appropriate that our summit on the U.S.-Mexico policy happens here in Texas. The men of Spain began their high adventure on this continent 500 years ago, and the men of England their own 400 years past. And in Texas is where their inheritors met, made war, and ultimately made a nation. We meet today because that nation in Texas, and both our nations in the United States and Mexico, are under tremendous threat. The United States leadership class is gripped with an inability or unwillingness, and most likely both, to face the appalling realities of the Western Hemisphere as they exist now. They do not grapple with the causes or nature of mass migration. They do not contend with the realities of left-wing autocracies dominating hemispheric government. They do not understand the nature of the cooperative synthesis of state and cartel that controls migration, trade, and security. And they don't even acknowledge the penetration of the hemisphere by the powers deeply hostile to America and our way of life in Russia, China, and Iran. Incapacitated by perennial absence of policy imagination, it does not use all the tools at its disposal to secure America's own liberty and safety, eschewing common sense solutions that we've talked a lot about at the foundation, things like direct linkage of trade and security, foreign terror designations for state-sponsored criminal cartels, and the use of the armed forces for their own primary mission, the direct defense of the United States. The threat to America is so profound and the American governmental response so weak that we must say directly what is obvious. The leadership class in Washington, D.C. cares more about the borders in Eastern Europe and the Middle East than it does about our own southern border. Fixing all of this requires, first and foremost, fixing the U.S.-Mexico relationship. The story with Mexico's own leadership class, if you want to call it that, is somewhat different. We cannot accuse them of looking away from painful realities, even with the serial fabulism and public denials of their president. AMLO occupies a hero's place in his own mind, and his narrative of himself as a singular and redemptive figure, even as his country falls apart, has done his nation great harm. Yet there is a cold realism underneath the bluster, and we should acknowledge it. The men in charge in Mexico understand a series of things that those in Washington, D.C. simply will not. They know that they may partner openly with criminal cartels who traffic in human carnage. They know that there is a metastasizing network and alliance of leftist autocracies throughout the hemisphere, of which they are a vital part. And they know there is substantive help on offer for themselves from Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran, for their enemies of and from their enemies of the United States outside the hemisphere. And they know that there's a class of desperate millions on the move every day whom they may weaponize and exploit for their own ends. And above all else, they know that the government of the United States is led by weak people who will not stand up to them. So given all the realities at hand, call the Mexican state and its partners in crime what you will, but do call them rational, because they are. They're making a high-stakes play, it's true, alienating your primary trading partner and allowing the use of your own territory as a base of operations against it is a bold move, to say the least, but we cannot accuse them of delusion. Americans suffer for it, but as much as we suffer, Mexicans suffer more. Therein is the tragedy of two peoples and two nations, each plunged into crisis. Ascending from it and restoring a relationship of friendship, peace, and goodwill is a task requiring both nations to do its part. It is also, I think, the most important task before us now. It's simple, but it's not easy. It requires choices, and those choices are what we are here to discuss today. So I've shared a grim diagnosis with you this morning, and unlike the governments in Washington, D.C. and Mexico City, we do not look away from that reality here in Texas. But I'll close with this. All of this is fixable if we have the vision and the willpower to do it. Here in Texas, as we start our fourth never-ending special session, our own state government is at work to chart a path forward. They're liaising with cooperative elements of the Mexican state where possible, rigorously enforcing rule of law and the integrity of the border where possible, and linking trade and security in ways that the federal government dares not. It's no wonder that Presidents Biden and AMLO both work together against Texas. They know we're charting out the best possible future, and their regimes are threatened existentially by our actions. Therefore, let me end as I began. Welcome to our first ever U.S.-Mexico Policy Summit. We've got a great day ahead. I can't wait to see some of the panels later today and hear from some of the speakers. And for my part, there's no place I'd rather be today than with all of you, and there's no people I'd rather spend it than with all of y'all. So thank you very much for being here, and God bless y'all.